Hello, and everybody on Zoom. I'm your facilitator, Chris Smith. Welcome to you here in the sanctuary, and those of you on Zoom. You guys always ask for somebody up on Zoom to wave or something, is that right? I can't remember.
You turn around and wave.
Turn around and wave. Ah, there we go. Okay.
And there are
Okay.
people's faces today smiling back on Zoom.
Oh, good. Great. Okay. This would be a good time for all of us to silence our cell phones. Oops. And if those that wish to have a particular joy or sorrow read by me during our service, please remember to fill out the form at the back of the church before the service begins. Okay? Yeah, right. I know. I saw that. Every time I see it, this is strange. Okay. Or put it in the chat if you're on Zoom, and Tina will read it. Or you can unmute and speak up on Zoom yourself at the right time. Okay, what is the right time?
When we're doing joys and sorrows.
Okay, all right.
Or doing announcements.
Okay,
Not in the middle of a sermon, because,
that's kind of
I'm all
stupid.
at work.
Or don't wait till the end either.
Which is
okay?
what I do.
Okay. On that table, you'll also find forms for any announcements you'd like to have us present. If you're new here, please ask any of us how to sign up to get copies of our weekly email newsletter, access the website or Facebook page, or find out how to get involved in any of our activities. Please speak to Deborah Smith. Now, I don't know who Deborah Smith is. Is she here? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay, all right. Becky Tanner or Tina?
I can get you on the email list.
Becky, thank you. All right. Before service begins, I have quite a few announcements today. This is kind of neat. Okay, Martin Luther King March and event, January 16th. We will have a march to carry the church banner in the parade. Take a shift at our information table to talk about our church and Unitarian Universalism. Sign up in the community room. This is from Tricia back at the back there, holding up a sign. Okay. All right. From Ann Aust, is that A-U-S-T? Huachuca City Community Garden Walk and Ride for Wellness, January 21st at 10 a.m. Please register ahead for lunch purposes. There's flyers in the community room.
We did it last year, and their advertising has a picture of Molly and Morris walking out front. So it's a hike that we do. We learn about the community garden, and it's a good event. So if you can come, come.
Great.
If you can walk, walk.
You can walk, okay.
Yes.
Huachuca City, yes. Our chalice lighting for today honors the UU Day of Religious Freedom and features words from Francis David, born Franz David Hertel, who founded the Unitarian Church of Transylvania in the 16th century. We light this chalice in remembrance of those who laid down the foundation of our communities in the spirit of freedom, love, and tolerance, to remember that true light will outshine darkness. As Francis David writes, faith is the gift of God. The true signs of faith are an inner purity and love and an honest life and good deeds. Love is the ultimate interpretation and completion of the law. According to Jesus, love is the plenitude of the law. Love is a royal commandment. Love is the true freedom, which does not bear the bondage of fear. Love is the creative spirit of the world, the highest treasure of humankind. Okay. In this community, we share our joys and sorrows with one another and acknowledge that not every one of them can be shared out loud. We recognize that some do not have voices with which to speak the depth of their pain or the height of their celebration. We make time each week, knowing the life and experiences every person matters, and together our lights shine brighter. Our community is like a bowl that holds all of our lives. The joys and sorrows which affect each person's life send ripples through all our lives. Tina will drop stones in the bowl of water to represent the joys and sorrows of our lives here today. She will drop more stones in the water for those joys and sorrows that were not spoken, and for those of the rest of the world. I will read the joys and sorrows that I have here. Okay. A joy from Tricia G. It is a joy that the committee to try to recall Supervisor Tom Crosby is now official. Who is Tom Crosby? Okay, I'm new here.
Some people may have voted for him, some may have voted against.
Okay.
We're a diverse community.
All right. It's a deep sorrow to me that we think it needs to be attempted. Okay. This is from Lex Heron. It's a joy. Most enjoyable hike to Kentucky camp organized by Molly on Friday. Beautiful weather and a great group of people. This from Joy Selinger. Is that Selinger? Joe. Joe Selinger, okay. 2 hikes I hiked with passed away Christmas week. Oh, 2 hikers I hiked with passed away on
Christmas week.
Christmas week, thank you. Joyce Summers and Jerry Goebel. Jerry was one of our hike leaders, and when he planned the hike, one could always count on an adventure.
There are 2 historical events that are celebrated by Unitarian Universalism this week, every year in January. And I think both of them show how Universalism developed in this country and the world, and they both pose questions about what form it takes and what it means. And I don't have answers for you, just a lot of good questions, but maybe that's the point. So the first is the Day of Religious Freedom. It happened 455 years ago, January 13th. It's about the Edict of Torda. And the king at the time was John Sigismund Zapolya. And a few years before, his mother had been regent for him. He became king at a very young age. She had made a similar declaration. He reaffirms it along with the whole Diet of Transylvania. And then afterwards, a few years later, he affirms it again. So I guess they've picked this as the big date of religious freedom. And what it says is, His Majesty our Lord, in what matter he, together with his realm, legislated in the matter of religion at the previous diets, gatherings, councils, in the same manner now in this diet, reaffirms that in every place the preachers shall preach and explain the gospel, each according to his understanding of it. And if the congregation like it, well. If not, no one shall compel them, for their souls will not be satisfied, but they should be permitted to keep a preacher whose teaching they approve. This is really dangerous for me to say to all of you. If you don't like the way I preach, get someone else. Therefore, none of the superintendents or others shall abuse the preachers. No one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone, according to the previous statutes. It is not permitted that anyone should threaten anyone else by imprisonment or by removal from his post for his teaching. For faith is the gift of God, and this comes from hearing, which hearing is by the word of God. This is the first time in European history, anyway, someone had made a proclamation that You get to pick your preacher, and you get to go to one you want to hear, and you will not be imprisoned for your faith. Of course, it was all about different forms of Christianity. You could be Catholic, you could be Calvinist, you could be Lutheran, and like this king, the first and only in history, you could be Unitarian. And he was influenced by Francis David, who's the Unitarian Church of Hungary wrote our chalice lighting for today in honor of this. But it was the first time that had been said. And John Sigismund Zapolya was open to debate. He wanted to hear about different faiths and different ways of governance. He was told by a wise elder in his court, you pick one religion and you pick one way and you become king of everything. Well, he didn't listen to that. He became Unitarian. He supported Francis David. And after his death, a new king, Stephen Báthory, came into power and united all of Poland and Lithuania. He was one Catholic king. So maybe it does work. Maybe kicking out Universalism and sticking to one religion worked for him. And Francis David was imprisoned and died in jail. But this experiment happened and touches us deeply. It was just within Christianity, of course. But this idea that other faiths have the right to exist and should not be extinguished or punished is incredibly important. Within this country, Universalism, in 1833, at its height, was the 5th or 6th biggest denomination in this country. That was the height, its high point. But, and again, it was about Christianity. There was the belief that a loving God would not send people to hell. There was a small group that thought, yeah, you go to hell for a little while, get punished, then you're fine. But most people believed in kind of a total universalism. I've talked to you before about what happens with Universalism after World War II, when they tried to join the National Council of Churches. Oh no, you don't believe in hell? You're not Orthodox enough. You can't be part of our group. And that's when Universalists realized, we can move beyond Christianity, embrace other faiths. That big no pushed them out into a larger understanding and awareness. It pushed them forward. Now, the other celebration, which happens every third Sunday in January, so the 15th, is World Religions Day. And the Baha'i started it in 1950. And it has a really Baha'i flavor. It acknowledges that different forms of religions are basically different iterations of God's presence in the world. That we are seeking human unity, that we all come from a similar family. And sometime I would love to hear from members in this church and community, maybe a friend of mine, all who are Baha'i, about what that faith offers. Because it talks about unity. It talks about no one group having all power and being sacred. It was one of the first anti-racist religions, the first that's supported women's education. It was a really powerful and strange and disruptive thing to happen in the middle of Persia last century and the century before. And so every year we celebrate on the 15th or on the third Sunday that all our religions are one, that we are unified. There's a beauty to that, but there's some problems, aren't there? Anytime you say we all believe the same thing, who gets to decide what that is, right? When we talk about having similar beliefs in other areas, let's say in psychology, universalism in psychology is the belief that human beings are basically the same from country to country, which is helpful because you can talk across borders. It's also helpful because you don't put any one group into some stereotypical description. But isn't human awareness constructed by human beings? Maybe it's because I love languages that I realize we create our world just by how we speak about it, right? So that from culture to culture and religion to religion, it's going to be different. Why is it that so many European languages have genders for objects? And I've never understood why in German, little girl is neuter, right? We construct our world. At any time we think that there are these universal ideas and that they're transcendent and we know exactly what they are and that there's no limitation on our sight and understanding, well, isn't it the people in power who get to describe that? There's no awareness of different communities and different cultures and different nuances. Within this country, we have tried to move out and be more universal. Eboo Patel, who is a Muslim writer, describes the Judeo-Christian construct in a way I had never heard before. Did you know that in the 1920s, as the Ku Klux Klan was rising up, a group of religious people came together and spoke about this Judeo-Christian connection? Because, of course, the Klan not only attacked African Americans, other people of color, it went after Catholics and Jews. And so groups came together and declared, we are part of a common history, and Jews and Catholics and Protestants will not hurt each other, we will support each other. It was an actual project, an actual construct to stand up against the forces like the Ku Klux Klan. I wasn't aware of that. I just thought we had always called ourselves a Judeo-Christian country, that our founding fathers put that somewhere in the Constitution, that it was part of the ethos of who we are. But it was something we embraced in order to stand up to divisive, damaging forces. But now as we move forward, are we a country that is only Judeo-Christian? We have many more religions moving in. We are the most religiously diverse country in the world. And of course, we have many nuns. There's actually a group of nuns listening to nuns. Have you heard about them? NONESs that don't have a religious affiliation, listening to wise NUNs who are doing justice work in the world. That's a group I want to be part of. But we are a diverse group. And so we are no longer just Judeo-Christian. But how do we move forward? There are many interesting podcasts out there by people who realize that just by being born, they are interfaith. One of them is Jack Gordon. He does a podcast called Interfaithish. His father is Jewish. His mother was sort of Christian with Baha'i members of her family. He is now Baha'i. Another really powerful voice, a young man who was born to a Hindu father, a Sikh mother, was pushed into action by what happened in Michigan when the Sikh temple was attacked 10 years ago by a stray, violent gunman. There are many people out there representing this country. As Eboo Patel says, if I walk down most hospitals, I will find a person who had a Hindu mother, maybe a Muslim father, who went to an Episcopal school. Throughout our life, we are multicultural, multi-religious. We may not even be aware of it. How do we acknowledge the differences without assuming there's one way to talk about it all? There's a lovely day called the Golden Rule Day, and how many religions adopt that. That might be a start, but aren't you imposing a worldview on that? So Eboo Patel has this beautiful podcast where he's talking to David Brooks. And David Brooks has really studied religion recently, grew up a Jewish boy going to an Episcopal school where he'd sit in the chapel and feel awe by that space. And whether or not we understand and know other religions, we have been influenced by them. First of all, anybody who's Jewish in this country clearly will have been influenced by Christianity. And I know this, as I've told you before, I used to be a chaplain at an assisted living place for people with beginning dementia, most of whom were Jewish. And I would come bringing the Lord's Prayer written out, and I would come bringing the Christmas carols, all the lyrics written out, and they didn't need any of that. With their dementia, as you know, many people remember songs and prayers, and they knew all the Christmas carols, and they knew the Lord's Prayer. And it's really interesting listening to Ibu, who's Muslim, talking with David Brooks, who's a strange amalgam, but originally Jewish, talking about their love for Bruce Springsteen, who speaks about faith in a way that's sort of beyond religion, and in the middle of his Broadway show says the Lord's Prayer. Not because he's still Christian, but because faith moves through him and wells up within him. Ibu says when the wife of a dear childhood friend died, he was grateful. He doesn't practice his religion a lot, but the prayers came to him to be able to say them at that moment. Religion has a way of taking hold of us and welling up within us, even if we're not aware that they do. And there's one I had never realized until this week. When I was a kid, we walked up the street from my church to a Hindu temple a block away. And I was blown away at about 10 when they told me, you can be Hindu and still be Jewish. You can be Hindu and still be Christian. You don't have to give up who you are to be Hindu. And I found that so amazing. I had already seen Asian religions in Asia and multiple religions in Russia, and I knew there was diverse religion throughout the world. How amazing that a group of people would accept me and not say, well, you had to be Christian to come here. You could be accepted. What I didn't understand till this week is that is a part of Hinduism that developed because of colonialism. In conflict and in interaction with England, in India, Indians came up with an understanding of faith as something larger and universal and all-encompassing. And Gandhi himself writes a beautiful piece about it. After long study and experience, I have come to the conclusion that all religions are true, and all religions have some error in them. All religions are almost as dear to me as my own Hinduism, inasmuch as all human beings should be as dear to me as one's own close relatives. My own veneration for other faiths is the same as that for my own faith. Therefore, no thought of conversion is possible. And Hindus argue in Hinduism Today, the magazine, that understanding has permeated American culture so that we are more universal. I rode a bus with men from the State Department who'd been posted all over the world, and one of them, we used to celebrate Christmas together and Hanukkah and Diwali on the bus because we're all going to the same place. And one of them said, living in India is where my kids celebrated the most holidays. We did Christmas, we did Hanukkah, we did Diwali, we did all the holidays of the season. But in our country, what do? We kick religion out, we don't explore it, we don't talk about it. When we do diversity training, we rarely talk about religious diversity, and yet it's a huge part of who we are. How do we start to do that? How do we start to acknowledge the differences in a loving and growing way and talk about the commonalities, understanding there are nuances and there's difference? Ibu Patel says we are not a melting pot. We are more like potluck, you know? And instead of looking at it as a place where we, into our synagogues and into our churches, we invite difference. Oh, no, no, no. He was talking to a Muslim leader who says, we invite you in. You can come to us, and you can bring your foods and your understanding and your perception. It is a ever-evolving potluck. So there are some important questions. How do we do that in a way that we don't become separate little tribes? How do we acknowledge difference and yet see the commonalities? Who gets to define that? How do we listen? And folks, as in the spread of Hindu ideas and Christian ideas and Judeo-Christian ones, we've all been influenced, whether we like it or not. Maybe it's good brainwashing, maybe not. But it's good to understand what it is and where it comes from. And the young man I was speaking about earlier, Tahil Sharma, who was born Sikh and Hindu, is young, millennial, working with Gen Zs. He talks about how interfaith work is important, but it's becoming less and less relevant. If we just stay in dialogue and learning to understand, which are important, but we don't actually do things together, Gen Z and millennials are going to see us as a total waste of time. 2 decades ago, Bishop Swing of California, an Episcopal priest, went around California inviting faith leaders to do interfaith work together. And guess what they said to him? No. So he was pushed to think in a new way, and he thought, maybe it isn't faith leaders I got to work with. Maybe it's grassroots faith people, people adhering to the faith, people following the faith, working with other groups in specific locations. Maybe that's what I've got to do. And he has. And they've developed the United Religions Initiative that works all over the world, but in different ways, in different places, as needed. The way we, as Unitarian Universalists, see ourselves as covenantal. We don't believe a certain thing, but we work together. They also do that. They work together in different ways because there's no one way to do interfaith work. And I think there's always a balance in all of this. How do we show up in practical ways as we are needed? How do we talk big picture so that as a country, we start to realize how interfaith we really are? Much of the division that's been happening, a lot of the white supremacy, is fear about that change. How many people here are excited by having diverse religions in your life, able to influence you? And you're right, that is something that's part of who we are. We have been, as Unitarian Universalists, growing into that generation by generation. And there are more nuances and more ways to do that all the time. One question I have is, what do you do with those who are dictators? What do you do? Do we have a set of core beliefs that are absolutist? Do our principles help us with that? We see the worth and dignity of every person. We also believe in the 5th principle that every person lives by their own conscience. Are those absolute ideas that help us stand up when there is violence, when we understand something is wrong? The book, Everything I Ever Learned, I Learned in Kindergarten, written by a Unitarian Universalist minister, right, doesn't talk about what you do with bullies in the playground. What do we do? How do we stand up? Can we be Universalist and have principles we hold to? And that's not a moot point. Right now, in the UUA, there's something called the 5th Principle Commission that is angry about how woke we want to be, is standing up to those who want to dismantle racism and saying, but you're imposing your conscience on us. How do we work together, so diverse, and yet having some common beliefs and goals, right? Those are good questions for our future. And as Tahil Sharma reminds me, he says, you know, we're not going to wait for faith groups to invite us in and for leaders to work with us. We're going to do the work anyway. But he says that when you look at the interfaith community now, it's very similar to how it was 10 years ago. Very often it is run by structures that have funding, by white cisgender men who organize it all. But when you look out at the world and you see things like Black Lives Matter and you see grassroots, interfaith groups are already working together. And I think Patel pushes us to question, how much do we wait for the world to infiltrate us? Because it's going to. David Brooks was talking about his family of immigrants, and many immigrants in this country used to use Exodus as their language about coming to America, to the promised land. But his students now think that's a privileged viewpoint. America isn't the promised land. They haven't found the American dream. What new language out of our diverse religions will speak to us? Patel says, well, I use Medina, the second city of Islam, to talk about America. Are we going to use Hindu words? I think we will be changed, as we have already been changed. But it is also something we build, so that we don't fall into these little tribes. There are things we can do to build those connections. And Patel points to a town in Michigan that has 20,000 immigrants, that has numerous Muslims, where the school principal, with an Anglo name, puts up a map showing where each person in the school comes from in the world. Those are the things we can do. And I think as UUs, we can do constantly now. Marching in any parade that will have us to show our unity across divisions, right? And so hopefully we will find a way to stand up to the bullies in the playground, to find principles we stand on, to work together, to listen to difference, to be humble about our own ways of seeing the world that might cloud the language we use. Thank you.
Hear these words. You sit down if you'd like. It's kind of long. Hear these words from Abdul Baha.
Abdul Baha.
Baha, thank you, who lived from 1844 to 1921, the son of
Baha'u'llah.
Baha'u'llah. Thank you. This is really confusing to see this. Is the founder of the Baha'i faith. This prayer is often read on World Religion Day, which will be commemorated January 15th. While we affirm that all faiths are different, unique, and should be understood in their context and celebrated for their diversity, and that many of us don't believe in a sentient supernatural being or Lord, Abdul Baha's prayer for understanding makes a good ending for today. O thou kind Lord, unite all. Let the religions agree and make the nations one, so that they may see each other as one family and the whole earth as one home. May they all live together in perfect harmony. Amen.
Listening to the post.
I'll raise it. I don't know if I take pictures.